The heavy double doors of the Draven Couture boardroom slammed shut behind me. Silence fell like a blade. Every pair of eyes in the room locked onto me at once. The long mahogany table gleamed under the harsh morning light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 40 stories above Manhattan, the city stretched out like it didn't care what was about to happen inside these walls. At the far end of the table sat my father, Thorne Draven. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his charcoal suit sharp enough to cut glass. The same man who once carried me on his shoulders through Central Park now looked at me like I was a problem that needed to be erased. "Elara Draven," he said, his voice low, calm, and final. My stomach twisted. "You are hereby terminated from Draven Couture. Effective immediately." The words hit me like ice water poured straight into my veins. A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the executives and major shareholders seated around the table. Cameras flashed. Someone's phone started recording. My fingers tightened around the leather portfolio I was holding until my knuckles turned white. Thorne leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Miss Draven has been found guilty of serious misconduct," he continued, each word measured and loud enough for the microphones to catch every syllable. "She stole proprietary creative concepts meant for our flagship spring collection. She misused millions in company funds to finance her unauthorized documentary projects. And she accepted bribes from our biggest competitor to deliberately sabotage this family's legacy." Lies. Every single word was a knife. I felt the blood drain from my face. My legs threatened to give out, but I locked my knees and forced myself to stand tall. The room began to spin slowly. Flash after flash exploded in my eyes, blinding me. I looked to my right. My mother, Seraphine Draven, sat perfectly still in her cream silk blouse, her diamond earrings catching the light. Her hands rested gracefully on the table, but her eyes stayed fixed on the glass of water in front of her. She said nothing. Not one word to defend her own daughter. And then, my sister. Vesper Draven leaned back in her chair with effortless elegance, one leg crossed over the other. A tiny, satisfied smile played at the corner of her perfectly painted lips. She wore the new ivory silk blouse from the upcoming line, the one I had spent 3 sleepless nights helping to concept. She looked pleased. In under 10 minutes, everything I had built inside this company, every late night, every sacrifice, every idea I had poured into this family name, was being burned alive in front of the entire board. The gavel came down with a sharp, merciless crack. "Security will escort Miss Draven from the building," Thorne announced, his voice steady as stone. "Her access to all Draven properties, accounts, and systems has been permanently revoked." 2 large security guards moved toward me from the back of the room. Their footsteps echoed loudly on the marble floor. For one terrible second, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the man who used to read me stories until I fell asleep, at the woman who once held me when I cried after my first heartbreak, at the sister who used to sneak into my bed at night when she had nightmares. How could they do this to me? How could the people who shared my blood publicly execute me like this, just to protect their profits? As the guards gently but firmly took hold of my arms, a single burning question screamed inside my chest. What kind of family ties a noose around their own daughter's neck and pulls it tight in front of the whole world? The black town car dropped me off at the iron gates of the Draven estate, just as the sun began to bleed across the Hudson. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the sprawling mansion that had once felt like home. The same marble steps where Vesper and I used to race each other as children. The same heavy oak front door that used to swing open with laughter. Tonight, it felt like walking into a tomb. I pushed the door open without knocking. The grand foyer was dimly lit. Only the crystal chandelier above cast cold, fractured light across the marble floor. My footsteps echoed too loudly. They were waiting for me in the formal living room. Thorne Draven stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch. Seraphine sat on the ivory sofa, legs crossed, her face a perfect mask of calm. And Vesper lounged in the velvet armchair like she owned the entire world, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. I stopped in the doorway, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "How could you?" My voice came out quieter than I expected. "How could you do that to me, in front of everyone?" Thorne didn't turn around right away. He took a slow sip of his drink before finally facing me. "This is business, Elara," he said flatly. "You brought this on yourself." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Business?" I stepped closer, my hands trembling. "You accused me of stealing ideas I created. You said I took bribes. You destroyed my reputation in 10 minutes. And you call that business?" Seraphine finally spoke, her voice soft but ice cold. "We had no choice. The board was asking questions. The investors were getting nervous about your little documentary project." My stomach dropped. "You knew," I whispered. "You all knew about the factories, the children, the 12-hour shifts in those sweatshops we contract with in Bangladesh." Silence. Vesper finally looked up from her phone. Her eyes met mine without a trace of shame. "Of course we knew," she said lightly, as if we were discussing the weather. "Everyone knows. That's how the industry works, sister. If we paid fair wages and followed every ridiculous labor law, we'd be bankrupt in 6 months." I felt something inside me crack. The girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the sister I protected from bullies in school, was looking at me like I was the enemy. "You're the one who wanted to sell the company to that foreign conglomerate, aren't you?" I said, my voice shaking. "That's why you needed me gone, so you could push the deal through without anyone asking questions about the supply chain." Vesper smiled. It was small, sharp, and cruel. "Smart girl. Always were the clever one. But clever doesn't pay the bills, Elara. That deal is worth over $200 million. My cut alone will set me up for life." Seraphine sighed, as if this conversation exhausted her. "Elara, darling, sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the family. You'll understand one day." "Sacrifices?" My voice broke. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You sacrificed me. Your own daughter. You let them drag me out like a criminal while you sat there and said nothing." Thorne set his glass down with a heavy clink. "Your access to all family accounts has been frozen," he said coldly. "Credit cards, trust fund, everything. If you continue working on that documentary, we will sue you for defamation and theft of intellectual property. You won't have a dime left to fight us." The room spun. I looked at each of them, my father, my mother, my sister, and felt an emptiness I had never known before. This was the price of blood. Not love, not loyalty, just silence and money. I took one step back, then another. My chest felt tight, like someone was slowly squeezing the air out of my lungs. Memories flashed unwanted through my mind. Christmas mornings around the tree, summer vacations in the Hamptons, Vesper falling asleep on my shoulder during long flights. All of it felt poisoned now. "I thought we were a family," I whispered, barely loud enough for them to hear. Thorne turned back toward the fireplace. "Families protect their legacy, Elara. You chose to threaten it." I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of that living room, the echo of my footsteps chasing me like ghosts. The heavy front door closed behind me with a final hollow sound. Outside, the cold night air hit my face. I stood alone on the marble steps, arms wrapped tightly around myself, staring into the darkness. The betrayal burned deeper than any wound I had ever felt. It settled heavy in my bones, turning from sharp pain into something colder, something quieter. a slow, dangerous anger that refused to scream. It simply waited. And in that moment, standing there, broken and abandoned by my own blood, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not fall apart, not yet, because if they wanted to bury me to protect their empire of silk and lies, then I would make sure they felt every inch of the dirt I dragged them down into. The rain was falling hard by the time I reached the small cafe in Brooklyn. I sat in the back corner booth, hood still pulled low over my head, hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee that had gone cold long ago. My eyes kept darting toward the door. Every time it opened, my heart jumped. Then he walked in. Kai Lennox, my oldest friend, the only person in this city I still trusted. He spotted me immediately, shook the rain from his jacket, and slid into the seat across from me without a word. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. "You look like hell, Elara," he said quietly. I tried to smile, but it cracked before it even formed. "They didn't just fire me, Kai," I whispered. My voice was hoarse, barely holding together. "They destroyed me, in front of everyone. My own father, my mother, even Vesper." Kai reached across the table and gently squeezed my wrist. His touch was warm, steady, the only steady thing I had left. "I know," he said. "I watched the live stream. The whole industry is talking about it." I swallowed hard, fighting the wave of shame that rose in my chest. "I need your help," I said, leaning forward. "I can't do this alone anymore." Kai didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need." That night, we began. 2 days later, under a gray sky, I drove alone to a quiet residential street in Queens. I parked across from a modest brick building and waited, nerves twisting in my stomach like barbed wire. The door opened. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, slender, with tired eyes that had seen too much. Mira Ellison. She used to be one of Draven Couture's top runway models, until she walked away 3 years ago and disappeared from the spotlight. I got out of the car slowly. My hands were shaking. "Mira?" I called softly. She froze when she saw me. Recognition flashed across her face, followed quickly by fear. "You're Elara Draven." "I'm not here to hurt you," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "I swear. I need to know the truth. About the factories, about what my family has been hiding." Mira stared at me for a long time. I could see the battle happening behind her eyes, the fear of speaking out versus the weight she had carried alone for years. Finally, she sighed. "Come inside." Her apartment was small and dimly lit. On the coffee table sat a battered cardboard box. She opened it without ceremony. Inside were old SD cards, handwritten notes, and several unmarked USB drives. "I filmed some of it myself," she said, her voice low and rough. "When I was sent to inspect the factories in Dhaka, they told me it was just a PR visit. But I saw the children, 8, 9 years old, working until midnight. Tiny fingers stitching our silk dresses." She plugged in one of the drives. The footage began to play on her laptop. Raw, shaky, heartbreaking. Small hands moving frantically under flickering fluorescent lights. A young girl, no older than 10, coughing from the dust while she sewed sequins onto fabric that would sell for thousands of dollars in New York. I watched in silence, tears slipping down my cheeks. "They knew," Mira whispered. "Your father signed every contract. Your mother approved the budgets. Vesper even visited once and laughed about how cheap the labor was." Each word felt like another crack in my chest, but something else was happening inside me too. The crushing pain, the suffocating despair. It was slowly transforming, turning colder, sharper, into something dangerous. I wiped my tears away with the back of my hand. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice quieter now. steadier. 7 years at least, Mira replied. Maybe longer. I stared at the frozen image on the screen, that little girl's exhausted face. A strange calm settled over me. The broken daughter who had stood in that boardroom. She was fading. In her place, someone new was waking up. Someone colder. Someone who could calculate. Someone who could wait. Kai met me later that night in an underground editing studio. I handed him the drives. Start cutting, I said, but keep it quiet. No one can know yet. Kai studied my face carefully. You've changed, he said softly. I met his eyes without blinking. Yes, I have. As I walked out into the cold night air, the city lights blurred around me. The pain was still there, deep, raw, and bleeding. But it no longer controlled me. It fueled me. I could feel the first threads of the noose beginning to unravel, not around my neck, but slowly, carefully around theirs. And for the first time since that boardroom door slammed shut, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The editing studio smelled of stale coffee and warm electronics. I sat beside Kai Lennox in the dim glow of multiple monitors, watching the final cut play out in silence. The raw footage from Mira Ellison had been woven together with surgical precision. Shaky clips of tiny hands stitching sequins, exhausted children's faces, and hidden audio recordings of factory supervisors laughing about deadlines. Every frame felt like a blade. Kai leaned back, rubbing his eyes. It's done, Elara. This is airtight. Once this drops, there's no coming back for them. I stared at the frozen image on the screen. A little girl, no older than 9, her fingers raw from needles. Something inside me had grown very still, very cold. The broken girl who had cried in the rain outside her family mansion. She was almost gone now. In her place was someone sharper, someone who could wait. A soft knock sounded at the studio door. Kai tensed. I signaled him to stay quiet and walked over. When I opened the door, Damien Cross stood there in the hallway, rain still dripping from his coat. The longtime internal counsel for Draven Couture looked exhausted and haunted. Elara, he said quietly, we need to talk. Alone. I let him in. Damien didn't waste time. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and placed it on the table. I've kept these for years, he said, his voice low. Internal emails, signed approvals. Thorne and Seraphine both knew about the child labor. They knew the ages. They knew the conditions. They signed anyway, because it kept the margins high. He looked at me with something close to shame. I stayed silent too long. I told myself it wasn't my fight. But after what they did to you in that boardroom, I couldn't live with it anymore. I opened the envelope with steady hands. Page after page of cold corporate language. My father's digital signature. My mother's approving replies. Even a casual note from Vesper suggesting they keep the PR team ready in case anything leaks. Each line felt like another twist of the rope. I should have felt rage or fresh heartbreak, but instead, a terrifying calm washed over me. The kind of calm that comes when you finally accept what your family truly is. Thank you, Damien, I said softly. My voice sounded different now. Detached. Precise. He studied my face for a long moment. You're planning something bigger than just releasing this, aren't you? I didn't answer, because I had already decided if I dropped the documentary tomorrow, my family would unleash every lawyer, every crisis manager, and every dollar they had to bury it. They would spin the narrative, discredit Mira, threaten Kai, and paint me as the bitter, disgruntled daughter. No. I wanted them standing on stage, smiling for the cameras, believing they had already won. I wanted them completely unprepared when the blade finally fell. So, I chose silence. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of careful preparation, while the Draven mansion buzzed with excitement over the upcoming launch party at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I stayed invisible. I watched from afar as invitations went out to every major fashion editor, influencer, and New York socialite. I saw the press releases praising Draven Couture's bold new vision and the unbreakable Draven family legacy. Every headline felt like another loop in the noose. One evening, I stood alone on the rooftop of Kai's building, looking out over the glittering city. Memories kept surfacing against my will. Childhood birthdays in that same mansion. My father's proud smile when I won my first award. My mother's perfume as she hugged me goodnight. All of it now tasted like poison. I felt the old pain rise again. But this time I didn't push it down. I let it burn. Then let it freeze. Because tomorrow night at the Met, under crystal chandeliers and flashing cameras, my family would stand on stage and celebrate their empire. And I would be watching. Not from the audience, but from the control room. The noose was almost ready. They just didn't know the rope was already around their necks. The Metropolitan Museum of Art glittered like a jewel that night. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors. Designer gowns shimmered. Champagne flowed. The air was thick with perfume, laughter, and the soft click of cameras. I stood in the shadows of the control room overlooking the grand hall, heart beating slow and steady. Below me, my family took the stage. Thorne Draven stepped up to the microphone first, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed he still ruled the world. Seraphine stood beside him in a flowing emerald gown, elegant and untouchable. Vesper posed gracefully on his other side, waving to the crowd like a queen accepting her crown. Thorne raised his glass. "Tonight we celebrate not just a new collection," he said, his voice booming through the speakers, "but the enduring legacy of the Draven family. A legacy built on vision, on strength, and on unbreakable blood ties." The audience applauded warmly. I watched them soak in the admiration, and then I nodded to Kai. The giant screen behind them suddenly went black. A single line of white text appeared. "The truth behind the silk." Thorne frowned. The footage began. Raw, unforgiving, devastating. Mira Ellison's voice filled the hall as the first clips played. Tiny hands stitching under harsh lights, children's faces streaked with exhaustion and dust. Then came the emails. Thorne's signature. Seraphine's approving replies. Vesper's casual message suggesting they handle any leaks quietly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered loudly on the marble. Thorne's face drained of color. He turned slowly toward the screen, mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Vesper's eyes widened in pure panic. She took one stumbling step backward, then another. "No, no, turn it off!" she cried, her voice cracking as she lunged toward the side of the stage. But it was too late. The documentary continued, relentless. Mira's tearful testimony played clearly. They knew. The Dravens knew exactly what was happening, and they chose profit over those children's lives. Seraphine's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the stage, hands covering her mouth as sobs tore from her throat. Tears streaked her perfect makeup. Thorne stood frozen, staring at the screen like a man watching his empire burn in real time. He finally turned his head and looked straight toward the control room. Our eyes met across the distance. In that moment, he understood. It was me. His own daughter had tied the noose and pulled it tight. Security tried to escort Vesper off the stage, but she was hysterical, clawing at their arms, screaming that it was all lies. Police officers moved through the crowd now, badges flashing under the lights. 2 detectives approached the stage. "Thorne Draven, Seraphine Draven. You're under arrest for conspiracy to conceal child labor violations and multiple counts of fraud." Thorne didn't resist. He simply stood there, shoulders slumped as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The proud man who had once publicly executed me in the boardroom now looked small, broken. Seraphine was still crying uncontrollably as they helped her to her feet. Vesper tried to run, but officers blocked her path. She would face her own investigation and the complete loss of any claim to the Draven Empire. I watched it all from above. No smile crossed my lips. Only a deep, quiet sadness settled in my chest, mixed with something else. Something like release. The kind of peace that comes when you finally cut the rope that was choking you. Later that night, long after the lights had gone out and the last camera had left, I stood alone on the steps of the museum. The city hummed around me, indifferent as always. I closed my eyes and let the cold wind brush my face. In the silence, a single thought rose clearly in my mind. Blood does not always mean family. Sometimes the people who share your name are the ones who will sell you for silk and gold, and sometimes justice is the only way to finally breathe again. I had not destroyed them out of hatred. I had simply refused to let them destroy me, and in doing so, I had set myself free. This story is a reminder that when your own family betrays you for money and power, don't wait for them to change. Use your truth, your voice, and your strength to take back your life. Because your freedom and your conscience are worth far more than any false legacy they try to build on your silence. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West, stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.